guys have been up, to the Funiac as you go to Ed's, Tasty Freeze, and good places to eat on the way to Blue Lake. So just want you to know that he was one of us. He's local. But he went away to college at Sam Houston State, where he was a 2-year academic All-American, and went on to dental school, which Sean's also a dentist, orthodontist. And whenever he's going to dental school, to keep his passion in football, he started becoming a referee. And started off obviously in high school, I guess junior high school, whatever, Southwest Conference, Big 12, and was recognized as having somebody that had really good talent, and by the NFL. And so he served as an NFL referee. Started off as a line judge, had a Super Bowl, became a head referee, had another Super Bowl as a head ref, and currently is the senior vice president of the NFL. A lot of time up in New York. He's also a neighbor. He and Ashon have built a beautiful home just down the street from us. I know, Brad, you've been to our home, and just go down to the beach about 4 or 5 houses, and that's where they live. So we're actually neighbors now, besides just being a brother. So without any further ado, I want Dr. Anderson to come up. Ask him kind of a lead-in pop-up questions since we're in a church. I wanted to hear a little bit about his faith journey, and particularly being a referee on Sundays, how does he keep his spiritual life going in that area? And then beyond that, he can talk about what he wants to about being an NFL official and now in a part of management. And also the fun part would be you all asking him a lot of questions. And he'd be glad to entertain all of those. So, Walt?
Thank you, Lane. I think this works fine. Yeah, there it is. Right. Thank you. Thank you. I've been called worse before. So, thank you very much. I will probably, as Lane indicated, I think it would be appropriate to talk a little bit about, how in the job that I've got, and I'm not the only one in this job. There are many of us that from really first week in August until the second week in February now, we work every Sunday. And so one of the things you do have to do is to stay somewhat grounded in your faith, is you really have to realize that, our commitment to Jesus and our faith is really a 7-day-a-week enterprise for us. And it's not just something that you do on Sunday. And one of the things that is helpful for all of us is that we all support each other. The people that I work with, just like me, who are working every week, particularly on Sunday, the things that we do is to look for opportunities to renew and restore our faith, to keep it strong, and to maintain that groundedness in the things that Jesus and God want us to do. One of the things that all of our crews do every Sunday, those that are working on Sunday, is whenever they get up in the morning, really even before they have breakfast, they have a devotional. One of the 9 people on the crew is usually the person that takes on that responsibility each week, and so they'll prepare a message, for the crew, and they'll get up and they'll take 15 to 20 minutes, and they'll talk about their message and their faith and share and witness with each other. Then they have breakfast, and then they head to the game. Those of us that are in the command center in New York, we'll do the same up there in terms of just getting together, not just on Sunday, but from this year with the Hall of Fame game being on Thursday, August the 3rd, through the second week in February, which is when the Super Bowl will be played. I will work every day from August 3rd till the Super Bowl. There are no days off. The process that we go through during the week, I'll go over that just a little bit, and then I'm going to allow you as fans to do something that you always want to do, and that's you can make the call. So you can raise your hand. You can. I want you to ask questions, and we'll just kind of let the conversation lead wherever your questions lead us to. So as I'm making a few comments here, be thinking of your question, and just when it comes to mind, just pop your hand up, and then we'll just start right there. But for us, the week is a long week. We do have games on Thursday. We have one game on Thursday. We have a lot of games on Sunday, and then we have one game on Monday. This year, we'll again have three games on Thanksgiving, and for the first time this year, we're actually going to play a game on Black Friday. So it'll give you something to do when you get home from shopping, as you can watch another NFL game. But for us, Sunday's been a long day, and especially when we've got 5 games this year over in Europe, and so they obviously start at a little different time zone than we are. So those are really, really early days. When we have the games, they start at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, which we have to be on site 4 hours ahead of time. So whenever we have those Europe games, we usually get up at 5, usually at the office by 5:30, and then by the time the Sunday night game is finished, it's usually about 1:30 in the morning. So it makes for really, really long days. And then Mondays and Tuesdays, we pretty much spend those days answering coaches' questions because there are 32 clubs, which means there's 32 head coaches, and 16 of them have more questions than the other 16 because 16 of them lost, and it's usually our fault that they lost. So they'll call us on Monday and Tuesday, and we also evaluate the game officials. We work at getting them ready during the week, and we're answering questions. Once the coaches calm down after a couple of days, usually by Wednesday, they're through with Sunday's game, and now they're worrying about next week's game. So what they do is they then start scheming, how to beat the next opponent. So they'll end up sending myself and Perry Fuel, who works with me, they'll send us questions about their next opponent. They'll send us a lot of video, and so we'll look at those and we'll do either a Zoom call or a phone call with them and go over their game plan with them. And then we end up making the officials aware of any unusual situations that might be coming up. We have to get our officials ready. They travel most of the time on Friday, except for the ones that are working Thursday night. And they meet on Saturday, and we usually are meeting with them. So a lot of Saturday is me making phone calls to all the different crews that are in the various cities, and then wake up on Sunday and do it all over. And if we do this every week, it just kind of, the season kind of rolls along. But during games, whenever you are watching it on TV, and this is where you may end up having some questions, but very often you'll end up hearing the announcers maybe talk a little bit about, well, they're talking to New York about that, or they're getting word from New York. That's me. So whenever the final decision, whenever we have like instant replay and we have a decision to be made, I certainly am talking just like I'll have a headset on in the office, and depending upon the window, during the 1 o'clock game, which is 12 o'clock Central Time, but we're on the East Coast, so it's 1 o'clock Eastern Time. We usually have 9 games going on at one time. And so you can imagine the chaos that is occurring, in the fast pace of the NFL game when I've got all these 9 games and I'm having to monitor at one time. And then there's a replay here and a replay here. And you're just constantly, I have this little belt pack that just has a whole lot of buttons on it, and I just push game A, game B, game C, and then maybe I'm back to game A. But then you get to the 4 o'clock window, and there's usually about 4 or 5 games, and it seems like a piece of cake. Then you get to the Sunday night game, and it's only one game. I mean, I'm usually eating, while I'm working, because you don't have time to eat the rest of the day. But that's kind of how the day goes for us. There's a lot of decisions. The game is very, very fast. There's a lot of stake. Obviously, there's a lot of money involved, in the league. A lot of jobs, depend upon, a lot of the decisions that we make, and most of them are correct. Unfortunately, we're human, and some of them are incorrect. And the wonderful thing, I was a head referee for 24 years, and very often, and I was around before we had instant replay. I was there when replay started, and now I am instant replay. But one of the most common questions that I used to always get when I was a field referee was people would assume that, gosh, you must really not like instant replay because it corrects your mistakes. And it's really the exact opposite. Because what instant replay really does for us as an official is it keeps you off of Sports Center on Monday morning. And, for us, game official, we're like a lot of people in the peacemaker role. And, blessed are the peacemakers, from that standpoint. Because what we really want to do is just go out, do your job, and try to go home and nobody knows you were there. You're trying not to be the story. There's enough other storylines from that standpoint. So, to me, the great thing about instant replay is it has allowed us to correct some very obvious mistakes, human mistakes, errors, that are made. There's 7 of us and there's 22 of them. The odds are not good that we can watch everything. And so the game is fast. We'll make decisions, and sometimes we have to correct those. And to me, that's the great thing about instant replay. It is a double-edged sword, and every year we debate, ownership debates, and I'm right there alongside with them because I'm kind of their consultant relative to the rules. But every year during the spring, the competition committee and then all of the owners get together and they debate in a room, usually over several days, what rules they may or may not want to change. And it's a very lively debate because the spectrum of owners goes from one end to the other. You've got some owners and they still don't even vote for instant replay, let alone making new rules for instant replay. And then you get other owners, and they'd like to have almost every play reviewed, but the game would just take too long. And you get everything in between. So at the end of the day, it's like a lot of things in life, you just try to strike a proper balance between no replay and lots of mistakes and reviewing everything, and then you settle upon those. And then that's where we start the season. Yes, and then you'll next. Okay. I have a team of people assigned to watch each game individually. And then what those people are doing is if you can envision, they're paying attention, they're listening through a headset to the crew on the field. And so like if there's a challenge, say Coach Brad, challenge, he throws his red flag and he challenges a play, and it might be challenge in Pittsburgh. And so that kind of will get my attention. So then I'll look at that screen, and they're kind of used to queuing up the most important shot. I don't need to watch everything. I just need to watch usually about 10 seconds worth of the critical point, and they're trained to look for that. And both in New York and then in the replay booth at the stadium. We have 2 people. We have a replay official and a replay assistant in the booth at the stadium. So part of their responsibility is to help the person in New York cue these videos up, and then we'll bring the head referee over to the little Surface tablet. Okay. The announcers really get in trouble. They really get in trouble when they call it an iPad because Microsoft paid $500 million to call it a Surface, not an iPad. So you got to be really careful what you say on the air from that standpoint. So the referee will come over and they're looking in that little Surface. The person holding it with the box, and they're talking to me. Hey, Walt, looks like the ball hit the ground. Looks like a touchdown. Not, and they say we're going to reverse it, and then the referee I'm out of there already because I may be. Yeah, hey, Walt, we got a challenge in Miami from that standpoint. So the 1 o'clock window, it's pretty hectic. But there's a lot of communication, a lot of technology. Technology has really, made it possible for us to evolve with the game because what you all watch, on Sunday afternoon, is a perfect example of how technology has taken things, I remember watching football games and it was one camera, you know, from that standpoint. Super Bowl, we had 88 cameras from that standpoint. I wasn't monitoring 88 because about 38 of them are on the quarterback's mom, quarterback's dad, the other quarterback's mom, the other quarterback's dad, you know, the owner, you know, owner's mom, you know, the other owner. You know, you can rule out about 38. So during the Super Bowl, yeah, it's most of our games are anywhere from 12 to 20 cameras. Primetime games are 32. Super Bowl, we monitor about 50 on that.
So. Do they stay together? I don't.
Our audience would like to hear your question, ma'am.
Roger Goodell's listening. He wants to hear what you have to say.
The referee teams, do they stay together all year, or are they mixed up?
Excellent question. We call them crews. There's 7 officials on the field, and then the 2 that I mentioned up in the replay booth. So those 9 people, men and women, okay, and we have women on the field officials. We have 3 women that are officials on the field, and then we have 6 women that are in our replay positions up in the booth. So those men and women, those 9, they stay together the entire season. So if you're working in Atlanta in week 1, you're going to work together, and then week 2 you may be in Seattle, and week 3 you may be in Miami. You travel together the entire season. All of these officials, including the replay staff, they get graded by me and my staff throughout the year, and the ones who make the highest grades are the ones who get the playoff assignments when we end up making the playoffs. And those that rate out number 1, they get the Super Bowl. So performance does matter. Right, and it's that's one of those debates again that the competition committee and ownership always talks about relative to playoffs, because you know the playoffs, somebody's moving on to the next week and somebody's going home from that standpoint. So they're very, very sensitive about making sure that the very best are working the playoffs. And the reality is, you know, when I got 100 and there's 119 field officials and then 34 replay staff, you're going to have some that are performing much better than others. Some of us have bad years from that standpoint, just like teams have bad years. And, you know, you're not going to a bowl game, you're not going to the playoffs, whatever it might be. You're not getting brought back the next year. And so accountability is very, very serious for us. So when it comes to the playoffs, they realize that even though they may not have worked together during the year, those are the best of the best. And the reality is, and I know during my 24 years, most of all of my playoffs games, you were working with people that through the years you'd work with. Even if they weren't on your crew, you work with them numerous times, so you get very familiar. And part of what helps, and part of my responsibility is all of the crews have to work at having similar what we call mechanics. So the way they work the game is the same from one game to the next. That's one of the things that the coaches are always heavily questioning us on is consistency. You want the call, you know, you want holding in one game to be the same as it is in another. Pass interference in one game is the same as the other. And of course, when you got that many humans involved, it's a challenge. And that's why I work every day of the week from August to February.
Of the plays reviewed, what percentage are confirmed and what percent are overturned?
Our reversal rate this past year, we ended up reversing about 45% of the ones that we reviewed. Our ultimate goal is to get to 100%, which means because of the way we now work replay, we really only stop things when we know there's been a mistake in most of the time. Now, a lot of times the coaches will challenge because they're praying. They're at church. They're praying that we're going to reverse it. The percentage of coaches challenges that get reversed are about 35%. But when you consider we control everything inside of the 2-minute warning, and anytime we have overtime, it's always on us. They can't challenge. But when you combine the two, booth reviews plus coaches' challenges, we're at about 45%. And that's gradually been going up, which is a positive for us, because what it means is we're often even telling the officials in real time. You might have noticed last year, maybe hearing a term expedited review, where we don't end up wasting the time bringing them over to the $500 million Surface tablet, from that standpoint, just to get the game moving along, to let y'all watch football. And, hey, it was short of the goal line. It's now 2nd and goal. It's not a touchdown. And let's just move on. Let's not waste a minute and a half of people's time and force you to listen to Joe Buck for another minute and a half. Yes, sir. Andy Reid. Yes, sir. Kansas City
No,
Chiefs.
I've seen, or we've all seen, so many games decided on 50-yard pass interference calls. Are you in favor of a 15-yard penalty for pass interference?
One of the things that is special about my job is I don't make the rules. I
Right,
just simply enforce them.
I understand that, but I just wanted your opinion.
I don't care. Doesn't really matter. I will give you both sides of what the arguments are from that standpoint. In the National Football League, a little bit different than the college. College has that 15-year or 15-yard rule from that standpoint. But the level of skill of players in the NFL, things are so subtle. You end up with a defensive back, and the game is so fast, who would know how to game the system, and toward the end of the half or end of the game, if they know that the worst they were going to get is a 15-yard penalty, they'd figure out a way to game the system on that. And so it has been debated for many, many years in the NFL. Right now, there is no appetite for changing that. What we did do, though, last year is we had a long discussion in the offseason prior to last season about defensive pass interference. And we ended up making some adjustments about what we actually called relative to allowing a little bit more contact before we ended up making that 50-yard penalty, because that's what it very often ends up being in the NFL. It's a very, very long penalty from that standpoint. So like a lot of things, you have to decide what you're going to trade off. And from a competitive balance, which is why they have a competition committee, is to maintain that competitive balance. They just feel like the trade-off would be too great on the defensive side to adopt the college rule. Okay. I think one of the things that was probably enjoyable from week to week is you ended up with a variety of environments in which you were working. And you had a variety of personalities. Some of them were very quiet. Some of them were very loud. Some of them were very funny, and others were just very boring, from that standpoint. So each week was different. You ended up going into the game knowing who your two head coaches were. You knew how you were going to have to communicate, and it was very often, you communicate with this coach very differently than that coach from that standpoint. This coach, he'd be asking you, like you, questions every other series. Mm-hmm. And this coach, he wouldn't have a question all day from that standpoint. Doesn't mean that this one gets any different calls than this one. It's just a different approach that they end up taking. I certainly enjoyed, the ones that, ended up having, some humor about them. Some of them even would change from anger to humor, just based upon the conversation that you end up having with them. And I have a lot of good stories that I can't tell.
You got one that,
Oh, no, I can't tell most of them.
Oh, okay.
From that standpoint. It's part of that unique confidential environment that we work in, that the people we work for kind of trust us to let them be themselves, without it just kind of being all out there in the public arena, so to speak. And so I've often been invited to write a book, and people write it for me, but it's like, no, I just can't pass those stories along.
okay, I'll ask a few more. It seems, yes, I'll stay away from this a little, yeah, sorry. It seems as though a lot of the referees, some of them are as big or bigger than some of the players out there on the field. They're Ed Hockley. I mean, I can go through several of them that are quite large folks.
Ed retired about 5 years ago.
Yeah, but I mean, is there a, and this is going to go to, are they getting bigger, or do you guys have a fitness program, or do you, and after you answer that, are there specific qualifications and tests that, that
Yes,
refs have to do?
We do have a fitness program. All officials are required. They have an annual physical, just like the players. They have to pass their physical to play. The officials have to pass their physical to officiate from that standpoint. So there's a certain degree of fitness. A lot of our officials were players. They played, we probably have, I think, 10 that actually played in the NFL. Probably have 50 that played in college, at the college level from that standpoint. So some of them are pretty big. I know I had an official on my crew for many, many years, Phil McKinley. Yeah, and that's what usually most of the players said, man, we need you on our side because we are getting beat, from that standpoint. And Phil was a big guy. So yes, some of them are big, and we hope that they are fit. But unlike what a lot of people think, we don't stay fit to stay up with the players. Our job is not to race the players to the goal line, it's to get out of their way. So what you really want to be fit is being agile, nimble, hostile if you need to be, but to get out of their way. Especially the linemen, because the defensive and offensive linemen, most of those are north of 300 pounds now, and they run, 4-point numbers, in the four. I mean, they are very, very, very fast, and they're on you just like that. So,
Speaking of that, so it brings up another question. You said that the game is pretty fast. Has it gotten faster since you started? Are the players faster, or that
exponentially?
Oh, really?
Yes. It's gotten. I started in '96 in the NFL. That was my first year, 1996. It's significantly faster. It's probably hard for people who haven't really been out on the field to realize that, especially watching it on TV, because TV has a tendency to not really give you a very good context relative to the speed of the game, just because, and that's not just in football.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever watch car racing on TV, and then you go to a car like the Indy 500, go to the Indy 500, sit on curve 1, and you'll have a very different feel of the race than when you watch it on Memorial Day, as an example. And the NFL game is like that. It's very, very fast.
And so when you guys so you came up through the college, do you guys recruit?
Yes.
When you're looking for, or do you have an advertisement?
I have a team of scouts that scout college officials, and so we do that, and that's what I'm doing usually on Saturday between my phone calls. I've got my monitors on in the office, and I'm watching Florida State, Alabama, UCLA, Michigan. I'm watching the college games that the officials that are on our scout board are working, so that I can watch them and formulate an opinion about whether they can work or not, because they'll be next year's class. And so every spring, we have a draft just like the clubs do, but nobody watches our draft. It is not on TV, yeah, because nobody would watch, you know, couldn't sell any ads, I'm sure, you know, but every spring, you know, this year I hired 12 new officials, you know, from different conferences around the country. Took 4 out of the SEC this year. Yes. Yeah. The only four that you had that were any good.
I'll ask one more and I'll pass it by. At the beginning.
No, but again, you know, we kind of do the same thing that the 32 clubs do. It's just we're kind of trying to do it behind the scenes, trying to be low key about it, just because that's kind of the nature of officiating. Is you want to, you know, not be seen, not be heard, but you got to be there.
Yeah.
From that standpoint.
You mentioned at the beginning, I'll pass the mic, about going to Europe and the long days in Europe. I'm just curious, when you've discussed this with the leaders in NFL, is that a market that's growing or something? It would seem to be kind of hard to compete with, you know, soccer. So I'm just
I'll
curious.
give you an example the other
Here
day.
you go.
Because I get a lot of emails, obviously, from a lot of different departments. Most of them I just ignore because I'm just in officiating, and that's really all I care about. But got an email 3 days ago because the Buffalo Bills are going to be playing in Europe this year, and they put their tickets on sale last week, and they put them on sale online where you could go online and not get into a queue, you know, to buy those. In the first 30 minutes, there were 400,000 people in the queue to buy tickets for their game. No, you're exactly right. I think the Tottenham and Wembley, I think Wembley seats about 90, and I think Tottenham Stadium seats about 70 from that standpoint. Playing 2 games this year in Germany. And I know during the 10 years that we had an NFL Europe program, which was sort of like a AAA type club, right? Afshan, you know, went over there, you know, with me. It was a great trip. I was over there working as an NFL official, training college officials during the spring in NFL Europe. So, you know, there's a real strong, you know, presence over there, and it seems to be growing. And as long as it's growing, you'll end up seeing, you know, the league at least entertain, you know, where they can end up looking for other opportunities.
Well, let me confirm something. Are you looking at the same replay cameras that we're seeing in the stadiums and on television?
Some of them. We actually, that's a great question. We actually went to a system 2 years ago. We hired a company, it's called Hawkeye, and y'all probably all seen them because if you watch tennis, who's a tennis player? Yes, sir. You ever watch tennis matches and they end up showing, you know, the ball coming in or out of the line, and whatever? That's the Hawkeye system that developed that technology. And so the NFL hired Hawkeye to come in and create a system for us. We pipe every camera feed, whatever cameras are used at a stadium in a game, we pipe those directly into New York. So we no longer have to wait on the network to show a view. You know, you're dependent upon what the producer and director end up deciding in the truck to show you. But if we got 12 cameras on a game, 1 o'clock, most of the 1 o'clock windows have 12 except the national game, which has 18. I got all 12 of those cameras on a screen with thumbnails, touch screen. I can blow them up just like you do with pictures on your iPad, slow them down, enhance them. This technology is just amazing what you can do. So, sorry, I didn't correct the surface. Yeah. Well, it's what you do on your iPad. Whatever. So, see, that's the problem with that surface. You can't do everything that you can on the iPad. You can't, you know, the surface is from that standpoint. But we get all of those angles. And so very often we'll end up seeing the shot and we'll make the decision before TV even gets to it. And we'll end up telling the referee, hey, incomplete pass. And they may then say, after discussion. Y'all end up hearing that phrase? Y'all hear that at all last year? Here's a tip for you. If you hear it after discussion, that means Walt told them what to do. Okay?
I did want to confirm that, Walt. You do have the final say-so, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you've given me a whole new perspective here. The next game that I go to, rather than standing up and booing the official on replays, I'm going to stand up after everybody's quiet and I'm going to holler, "Come on, Walt, you can do better than that."
You sound like my wife and my daughter. Now, they are very big Houston Texans fans. They're not only been big supporters of me, but they're big supporters of the Texans. Now, for all of my years in the league, I could not work Texans games because we lived near Houston. And people always ask, well, come on, Walt. I mean, even the coaches would say, Walt, we're good with it. You know, you got a lot of credibility. I said, look, you don't understand. If I ever missed a call, I couldn't come home. They changed the locks on the door. Yeah. So.
Then I can go out and tell all my football buddies, you don't believe this, but the dead man just flipped this coin.
Well, let's make sure it's got a head and it's got a tail. Okay, what's your call?
Head. I can't see it. Well, what
It's tails. You know, through the years, we've had some rather interesting coin flips that some of you probably heard about and see. So it's amazing how much time you end up spending with some of what many people would think is a lot of the minutia around, but everything matters, and the attention to detail. It's not important until it's important from that standpoint. So, we've had coins go and get stuck in the mud straight up. It's like, what do you do? From that standpoint.
I was going to follow up on Brad's question about the referees coming out of college. Do they indicate an interest in going to the NFL before you invite them, or do you just invite them?
It works both ways. Most of them do. Most officials, they get into officiating just because they just want to be involved in the game, not so much because the odds of getting to the NFL are very, very small. But if those that have been in it for a while, especially once they kind of get up where they're working in the college arena, they end up kind of getting a feel for wanting to do that, and so they'll apply. But we're scouting, and if I see somebody or any of my scout team, just like the teams do, if they see a player, just like if we see an official, and we can spot talent, and we look at them and say, hey, I'll call my scouting director and say, hey, do we have a foul on Joe Smith? No, we don't. I said, well, you need to call and get one because that person can officiate. And so then we'll end up following them. And most of them will follow pretty seriously. Whenever they get to that, what we call finalist level, we end up usually following them anywhere from 3 to 5 years from this standpoint. We bring them in for interviews. They have to go through psychological testing. We have a psychology firm that does profiles and read ink blots and the people who can do that for a living, because there's a certain profile of person that we're looking for. You're really looking for people who can work in real high stress environments and maintain their calm and their composure and deal with the criticism and deal with the fanatics, the fans, and the things that are going to be said, and the fact that somebody's going to lose every week, and you're usually going to be the one blamed for that. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with the stress and keep coming back for more from that standpoint? And it takes a certain personality to be able to do that week in and week out. And you want people that are really, you really want people, the NFL that invests so much money in its officiating staff, you want to keep people around more than a couple of years. You really want to get, anywhere from 10 to 15 years of service out of them. So you want to try to have good draft choices up front. So we spend a lot of time, researching them, watching them. We go to a lot of clinics and camps where we end up spending time with them individually as a person, not just watching them on the field, but their character is just as important, if not more so, than their competence from that standpoint.
I'm curious. During your years on the field as an official, who were, say, the top 3 players that you saw things on the field that you were just amazed at? Some of the athletes that you've been able to cover.
Oh gosh, it had to be more than 3. I had so many of his games, and probably, I hate to just pick out probably a few, but a couple of people do stand out, because I know Peyton Manning is one that stood out, because I spent so many weeks in training camp with Peyton. Just happened to be assigned to, when he was with the Colts, to a number of their training camps. And just watching him at camp in the off season and his attention to detail. And then on the field, when you're in and around him, just how focused and attentive he was. I actually had the game when he broke the season touchdown record. And it was actually a game where they had to come back. They were down several touchdowns, and they ended up coming back, and it was right near the end of the game. And he actually completed the touchdown pass, but they were down by 8, which meant they were going to have to go for 2. Well, most people, whenever they achieve a really significant record milestone like that, there's usually some degree of celebration, high-fiving, and so forth. I mean, he didn't miss a beat. It was touchdown pass. Once Billy Smith was my back judge, receiver called it at the back of the end zone. Billy went up, touchdown. Peyton could see it. It wasn't going down there, hey, give me the ball. That's the 51st pass of the season, et cetera. Immediately turned the sideline, we're going for 2. And then, he's just listening and talking with his coach. And going down, putting the ball at the 2-yard line, because without those 2 points, they don't even tie. They end up really losing. But there's just a lot of players, through the years. I had so many that the public persona is very, very different than on the field, the persona. And I know he's had a lot of press and a lot of stories, that are out there. But for many, many years, Ray Lewis, who was the middle linebacker with the Baltimore Ravens, a lot of things go off the field. And he has that persona, with his pre-game dance and all of those things that you end up seeing on TV. But out on the football field, Ray was the defensive captain. And so I, as the head referee, obviously had a lot of conversations with Ray. And his demeanor on the field, totally a 180 than what you would ever see in public. Because there'd be a penalty, maybe it's a complicated enforcement, whatever, and he'd be saying, well, what are my options? In just the calmest voice, so different, and it's like, whoa, you're expecting him to come up, get in your face and scream at me, me like he does with his dance and the opponents and everything else. And there's a lot of examples like that. And, but I think it attests to the true professionalism that they're trying, those players are trying to achieve. And so those are 2. And as luck would have it, I had a lot of games with Indianapolis and Baltimore, Peyton and Ray. Ray Lewis gave Peyton Manning fits. It was hilarious because you know how Peyton's always going, Omaha, Blue 88, whatever. And Ray would mimic him the entire game. Omaha, really? Omaha, right? Omaha, it was just, and every now and then Peyton would start laughing, out on the field, So it's serious business, but a lot of things, you know, go on out there on the field that are just sometimes really funny. Brett Favre was always a hoot to work for. He would say the darndest things in the huddle. I mean, he's down by 4 with a minute and a half, and he's up, hey guys, Mr. Miyagi's on the sideline. I mean, you'd think he'd be talking about calling the play, and he's talking about Mr. Miyagi being on the sideline, you know, with a sideline pass. And I actually have seen Brett draw plays in the dirt, you know, out there. It's just, hey, here's what we're going to do. Coach said run this. Nah, we're not going to run that. So a lot of those, I was very, very fortunate. 24 years, you know, a lot of plays, a lot of games. Not very many people can say they've ever watched the game from the same seat that I've watched it in. So it's unique. I've been very, very blessed. I have a great family that's always supported me because they're usually at home watching and cussing along with the rest of you at me, you know, from that standpoint. But they've always been very supportive, and I very much appreciate that.
Is there a call or a game or a play that you made that you were wrong that still sticks in your mind?
Well, I made a lot of those. That's a lot longer list than the personalities, you know, from that standpoint. Probably the call that I remember most that was wrong was in my very first playoff game. Was in '97, my second year, because your first year as a rookie, you're not eligible for the playoffs. So my second year, I got assigned to a playoff game, and it was a divisional game. It was the Broncos at the Chiefs. Where's the Chiefs guy left? Okay. And there was a field goal, and right before the half, and sure looked like holding to me, you know. So that's what I called. And there was a grab, you know, and there was a turn and so forth. But in reality, the kick had already been made. So even though it was a grab and what would have been a good call, the fact that the kick had already been made makes it mute, irrelevant, and should not have made that call from that standpoint. And that one's always kind of stood out to me. And it's one that I always kind of look back on as don't do that again, you know, from that standpoint. First playoff game, you know, and first kind of, you know, big mistake. I mean, it didn't make the media, you know, or the press all that much, but I knew I'd missed it, you know, from that standpoint. And it was a good lesson for me, you know, which served me very, very well for 22 more years, because I'd always look back on that. It kind of helped me in terms of, okay, take a deep breath, pause, go slow. Don't be in such a hurry to go with your first instinct. Think it through, and then if you still feel good about it, okay, you can always throw the flag late. We get a lot of bad press about that.
Right,
That was
right,
sure a late flag.
right.
We like late flags because it usually means you thought it through.
When you're talking about working all those days in a row, how do you deal with your family and being apart, and how does that work for you and your family?
Well, as I said, it works because they are supportive to help it work from that standpoint. Fortunately for me now, I've got all the kids either grown and on their own, or like Ashley, she's in school at Baylor University from that standpoint. Afshan, you know, has taken the opportunity. She'll come to New York spend some time up there with me in terms of trying to travel, you know, from that standpoint. But it would not be possible if you didn't have that kind of support from that standpoint. And she'd probably even tell you, even when she's in New York, I'm still working. You know, it's not like I can take 2 days off and let's go shopping. You know, so you have to have that kind of support, that commitment. It's truly a family effort, and it's not just with officiating. That's kind of what exists with our whole sport, coaches, players, especially during the season from that standpoint. But that's not unique to football. It's not unique to sports. Most professions, you know, end up with people having to make a lot of commitments. And again, you get back into life balances and trying to deal with things where you're trying to appropriately balance those things. And I'd be the first, you know, to stand up and say there have been a lot of times I've been guilty of letting it get out of balance from that standpoint, where there's so much effort, so much of your time spent on the job that you end up neglecting a lot of the other things that in the reality of things are just not that, the job's not that important whenever you try to balance everything else. But sometimes we make it more important than what it probably should be.
I was just gonna, those are good ones though, but, what's the worst venue for refs in the league? And I guess you can't say Houston, so.
Oh, no. That's a good question, because people ask me, where do you like working? I like working where it's warm. I never liked working where it was cold. So the worst venues to me, are the cold places in December and January when they're not indoors. Yeah, I don't mind Detroit. I don't mind Indianapolis, from that standpoint, but Buffalo in January is tough work.
Is there one of them that the fans are a little more tougher on the refs than others, like may say Oakland or?
There are a couple of fan bases that are well known for being tough. Nah, the Dog Pound, they're entertaining. The Dog Pound is entertaining. Philly's pretty tough. Fans in Philly are pretty tough. They're no longer in Oakland. The fans in Oakland. I wouldn't say that Oakland mentality has yet made it to Las Vegas, but maybe eventually, it'll come. A lot of the uniforms, I think, came with them, but I'm not so sure that a lot of the same stuff that was in the old, the old black hole, I think is what they called it in Oakland in the end zone. Because I went to Oakland a lot, because one of the things, and people used to hate me whenever I went to Oakland, and it was really unjust because they thought I was Walt Coleman. And Walt Coleman was who made the Tuck ruling whenever Oakland had the playoff game in New England. So after that, they could never send Walt Coleman to Oakland, but they'd send Walt Anderson. And of course, for the game, when the announcer said, today's referee is Walt, and that's all that got out was Walt. And I mean, nobody heard Anderson, so they just assumed I was Walt Coleman. And I mean, it just went downhill from there, so. But Oakland was pretty tough. On the reverse, I'd probably say the most unique environment to me is Green Bay.
Oh.
And it's because the structure there is so different than it, because the fans own the team. From the other 31 teams, it's a family or a person. It's a single unit, but it's the fans on the team. And so you just have a different dynamic. And they're very passionate. They certainly are great supporters of the Packers or so forth, but they just seem to very much appreciate football even when it's played by the opponent, at times from that standpoint. So it's a very, very, and the whole environment around there, around Green Bay, because it's just like, it's as if you put a stadium in the middle of Sunnyside, Laguna Beach. Say you put one between Sunnyside and Laguna Beach, right? And there's a stadium. That's what it's like up there. It's just like homes that are just like right across the street here, and then boom, Lambeau Field. And then on the other side, homes. I mean, it's really a unique environment up there. And on game day, I mean, everybody parks in everybody's yard, all around, and everybody walks to the game. So a lot of interesting venues around. Yeah, but I don't like cold weather. I'm a Floridian. I was born in Defuniak Springs.
I have a serious question. The incident that happened in
All
January.
these questions were serious.
Well, I know, but the young man that was taken down on the football field that had the heart attack.
Yes.
That was one of the most, I watched the whole thing, and that was hard to watch. And they didn't replay over and over the incident where the young man went down. How,
Because they had, his heart stopped 4 times. or they had to restart it 4 times, stop 3 times.
On the field? Wow. I know all the players stayed around for a little bit, and then they were all sent to their locker rooms. The referees go to a separate locker room during that time?
Yes, the officials have a separate locker room, but, you know, the uniqueness about that night is, because I had a sense, because obviously it was a prime game.
Yes.
Thursday night game, so it's the only game we had. You know, we're all at our normal stations, and I remember whenever he went down, because he first got up, then went down. I mean, that right away told me it wasn't really a concussion, because when you have the concussion and so forth, they start exhibiting behavior
They wobble.
while they're on the ground, and then as they're kind of getting up from that standpoint, so they got up, I'm like, God, that's unusual from that standpoint. And then the medical staff came out, and I could tell kind of from what they were doing that, so this was going to be different. So even in the command center, you know, once an injury happens and then TV goes out for a break, sometimes some people, you know, will say, well, they'll go take a break, you know, for a minute or so, whatever. It was right away Troy Vincent, who is my boss, number 2 behind Commissioner Goodell. You know, Troy, you need to get Roger on the phone. Because we knew right away this was going to be very, very unique. So what ended up happening was with the players all around, and then as he was, you know, being brought back and then brought back, we were already talking about kind of the process. And so once things became somewhat stable and they started to removed him from the field, we knew then we were going to send the teams to the locker room. And then we were going to keep them in the locker room and get both, you know, to get the 2 head coaches together, the referee, 3 of them got together. Donna Ponte was our person. She was on site. She was really the official voice of the league at the game on site. So those 4 people were then in communication with Commissioner and Troy Vincent and I. And that's when the decision was made. You know,
But it took a long time
to
have the decision made. It seemed like it took a long time to cancel the game, yeah.
Well, it was really just one of those processes where you want to make sure that everybody is informed. They have an opportunity to talk. Because see, it wasn't just, as an example, the 2 head coaches. They were not going to then make a decision without talking to their team.
Right.
So then they needed to go back. They wanted to talk to their team. They wanted to kind of, you know, gauge the pulse of their team because they knew that there was a lot of anxiety. You could see that just from, you know, the look on the players' faces, which was very, very different. And it was just it had never really happened.
Right.
To
It's an unusual circumstance.
to the NFL. And so everybody was really just wanting to slow down, get off the air, you know, and I think the network did a good job of getting off the air and kind of not putting anybody sort of under that spotlight.
Well, and then the 2 ESPN announcers actually prayed on television for the young man, which is really unusual in this day and age.
Oh, it is. I mean, certainly, you know, in this day and age, you know, things often appear on air to be much more secular than they are, you know, to have any basis in faith, regardless of what your faith might be. There seems to be an absence of that. I will tell you, around our sport, you know, it's really just the opposite. You know, players, coaches, there are far more people of faith who regularly exercise their faith. Now, it's usually not on camera. It's usually off camera. But if you ever watch a game, and this goes on in the college environment, you know, as well. You ever watch our game and the number of players, they don't show it. The number of players, you know, after they introduce them and they run out on the field, the majority of them go down into the end zone, get on a knee, and they're saying their prayer, you know, for what they want to, you know, pray in that situation before they go out and put on a show for entertainment. and I think it just ends up speaking, like so many things do, about, where people, put their, the true importance, of things from that standpoint. It's a big game. It's a big stage, a big environment, but it's played by people just like you and me. And they just maybe have different skill set than we do. But they think the same things and want the same things as all of us. We all have a role to play, and hopefully, by the grace of God, we're doing it in a manner that does him justice.
Did you ever have much interaction with Terry Bradshaw on the field? Is he as crazy on the field as he is today?
Yes and yes. Yeah. He's. You get what you get what you see. You're going to get with Terry what you see. He's the same on the field, off the field. From that standpoint, he's a character. Yeah, he is a character. And he seems to have a whole lot of money to give away these days. He's always putting that money in a suitcase and giving it away. Whatever.
Question. Anybody got a question? Okay, go ahead, Bob.
I make enough. Yeah, I make enough. Fortunately, in the NFL, which is very different, the NFL officials are just like the players. They have a union from that standpoint. And over the last really 25 years, things really, just like with player salaries, they're not as high as player salaries, but the average game official over the course of the regular season is probably going to make $250,000. Okay. And they fly first class everywhere they go. They stay, we cover their meals, their hotel, their expenses, from that standpoint. So it's not a player salary, but it has allowed a lot of officials through the years to really focus as the accountability has dictated now, sufficient time to be able to prepare during the week and spend the time, particularly during the season or from August to February, from that standpoint. I know whenever I started, there was probably 10% of the game officials in '96 that officiating is all they did. Probably now, easily 50 to 55% of our game officials officiating is all they do. And the ones that have another job from August to February don't see much of that other job. They have the flexibility to be able to do that. So that money has at least allowed them, to do that. Because when I came into the league, '96 average salary was probably about $55,000. So it's gone up that much over those 25 years. Yeah. A lot of hours. Yeah. A lot of demand. Thank y'all very much for your time. I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
What I was hoping we would do tonight by having Walt come is, one, you have a name. So when you're watching an NFL game or you're watching a college game, there's another aspect besides just the coaches and the players. There's people.
Well, they already said they now know who to holler at. Yes, exactly.
Yep.
He acknowledged that in his question.
Exactly. And even now he can take a flipping the coin back as a souvenir. The other thing we talked about as far as the family, you got to meet his wife and his daughter here. But his son, one of his sons, is a head referee in college, in the Big 12 still, is that right? And for you Alabama fans, he was the referee for your last national championship. So part of this family legacy as far as being a referee is also the support that you have for your son and continuing this profession that you've had. And for your Air Force guys, another son is in the Air Force, and so military there's two, and your two twins, and that, so it is a strong support network. The other aspect that Walt started off with I think it's important as people of faith is again recognize we hear a lot of this negative in terms of what's going on in the world and so forth. So appreciate that y'all do devotionals. There are Bible studies and, the cruise and so forth. So think about that when the games are going on, that we can be in prayer for them and helping their faith. And we know there's the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, a lot of people that are involved with that. You probably were involved in college as well as I was as a swimmer. And so there's other opportunities we have to be of support. So not only your family, but your collective family here. So appreciate your coming. And Pastor Brad, you want to lead us in a closing prayer?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for a chance to be able to learn and glean behind the scenes of what happens for these games and these referees. Dear Lord, I lift up Walt. I lift up the officials as we head into another season. I pray that you give them the ability not only to be with their families, to connect with their families during this stressful time, but also to be able to do their jobs to their best abilities. And dear Lord, I pray that those with faith are able to witness to those that they see and to lead them and plant those seeds for Jesus in their life so they can be the disciples that you've called them to be. In your name we pray. Amen.